You are live and recording. Hi, welcome everybody. Oh my gosh, it's so great to see all you over on the side of the screen. If you are having any issues with the video or audio quality, click on the help button. It's a question mark. It's up in the right-hand corner of your screen. It says help with a little circle. Also, Google Chrome is the best. We found that Crowdcast works best with Google Chrome. So if you're not on there, that is another way to check. Once you hit that question mark, you want to click on compatibility mode. So the quality should improve, but you will have a slight delay. And if it's too much, you can turn it off at any point. Any questions? If you have questions, we encourage you to ask questions because that is the most fun of this of all. Do not answer them, ask them in the chat screen, the chat thing, but there's a small little thing that says questions, ask a question. So click in there. A lot of people have the same questions. So go ahead and scroll through what people have already asked. And if you see your question, you can up poll it and that will upvote it. And then it'll float up to the top. So the questions that I am going to transfer over to Rebecca and Jeff will be the ones that are floated at the top. So it'll help cut it down on repeat questions. If you have any unresolvable issues, just go ahead and leave the presentation and log back in to see if the problem corrects itself. Brooke is in the background. She will log in and she'll be monitoring the chat and hopefully she can assist you. They're a lot better at that than I am. If you want to buy the book, which we highly encourage you to support our store, so we keep going doing this from home, there's a button in the lower middle part of the screen that will take you directly to our webpage where you can buy a book. We are not in the store right now, except for Jeff, because he gets to be in the store because he owns the building. I don't get to be there, but he does. So we are currently shipping books directly from our warehouse. So your book will come separately. You'll get your book shipment. And Rebecca has been kind enough to agree to sign book plates for us. So I will be mailing the book plates to her where she is hiding out in quarantine. She will sign them and then pop them in a pre-addressed envelope, and she will mail those directly to you. So shortly, Brooke is going to turn the chat off during the presentation when Jeff and Rebecca are talking. So that will go away. It will come back during the Q&A. So you can, chat with each other. You can talk to Jeff because we know everyone's going to have all the questions for Rebecca. So we are so excited. This is my very first virtual event. We've had a couple of them. So we're just very happy to have you all with us in conversation with Rebecca Stead with Jeff Kinney. If you don't know who he is, he's the best-selling author of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series and the owner of An Unlikely Story. Rebecca Stead is the author of When You Reach Me, which was a New York Times bestseller and winner of the Newbery Medal, the Boston Globe Horn Book Award for Fiction, and Liar and Spy, which was also a New York Times bestseller, won the Guardian Prize for Children's Fiction, and was on multiple state master lists and best of the year lists. Goodbye Stranger was a Boston Globe Horn Book Honor Award for Fiction and a New York Times bestseller. She's also the author of First Light, which is absolutely amazing. And actually, that would be a really good book to read right about now, wouldn't it? I think it would be good. It was nominated for many state awards. And Bob, which is one of my personal favorites. Oh my gosh, I love Bob so much, which he co-wrote with Wendy Mass. Yeah. Rebecca was born and still resides in New York City with her family. So she's here today to talk about her new book, which is called The List of Things That Will Not Change. It's about a 10-year-old named Bee with loving divorced parents and very big feelings, as we do when we're 10. It's funny with characters you will love and totally relate to. I don't know how she does it, but she does. You love her characters in her books. I've been a fan of Rebecca's since reading When You Reach Me, which I read, then I immediately listened to it on audio. She came in 2018. She came for school visits. We didn't get her in the store. But she and Wendy Mass came and visited a couple schools for Bob things in common. Like we were born on the same day, in the same year. We both had divorced parents, 2 boys. And now in the green room, not only do we have 2 boys, they are 2 years apart and the exact same age, and the older one is named Jack. When we were at the school, I stopped sharing any personal information because I'm like, all right, she's gonna think I'm a creep. But she did sign my book to her doppelganger. I could not wait. I was so excited to introduce you all to Rebecca in our beautiful event space. But now it is my distinct honor to welcome Rebecca this evening for my first virtual event in this time when, we're all feeling a little weird about things, right? And because the list of things that will not change will always include Rebecca Stead, making us feel just a little bit better about life. So, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Rebecca Stead and Jeff Kinney. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim.
That was awesome.
That was beautiful.
Kim said, she said, if you have issues that can't be resolved, that sounds like a Rebecca Stead title right there.
I'm going to put it on the list.
I'm hoping, I'm seeing that my frame rate is terrible. I'm seeing like, a little blip of myself every few seconds, but I hope that it's not that bad for everybody else. Rebecca, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. This is my first time doing this kind of thing too. I was hoping to meet you in person for the second time. I don't know if you remember that I met you once very briefly at an event. I think it was in New York City. Do you remember that by chance?
Which one? I do feel like we've met once, but I don't know where it was. It maybe Children's Book Week?
It might have been.
I feel like that's where I meet all the,
right.
biggest, glitziest people.
Right. I'm glad you don't remember exactly because it was a funny moment. I walked in, I had just read When You Reach Me, and I walked in and there you were sitting at a table with Judy Blume. And you were you were both very gracious and you said, oh, come join us. But I felt like, Rebecca's probably having her moment with Judy Blume. This might be the first time she's ever meeting her. And I'm going to come and sit down next to you as this cartoonist,
Oh my God, I would have loved for you to stay. That was when I met Judy Blume. I distinctly remember, it's like a flashbulb memory in my head and it was Children's Book Week. It was like one of those nice dinners. And I remember that we sat with we each had 5 different kinds of pasta or something on our plate. And it was sort of a surreal moment, but honestly, it would have been even better if you had stayed.
So part of your lore is that you had your laptop on your table with books that you were kind of working on, and your toddler knocked over the laptop and you lost the work, and that was a reset moment. And I read that one of the first things that you did was you reread books that you had read as a kid to reconnect to them. Could you kind of explain what happened there, what you were doing?
What happened was they weren't books I had written. They were stories.
No, read.
So
yes.
Yeah, they were short stories, and the short story is sort of like one of my first loves as a reader. I have just been reading them for as long as I can remember, and I love short stories. And so when I felt moved to write, I often thought I should try to write a short story. One, because I love them, but 2, because I thought, well, that'll be easier than writing a book because they're short, But as it turns out, like picture books, they're really hard to write. So I had these working drafts that I had been sort of coming in and out of for years. And I was not sending them out. I was really timid about the whole thing. And I don't know. You probably don't work on something have you ever worked on something for 12 to 15 years? At a certain point, it's not always the best idea. So in a lot of ways, these stories had been they were like retreads. And so when I discovered that my beloved child had knocked my computer off the dining room table onto the floor and that the thing would not go on, it felt at the time like a great loss, but in fact, it was kind of a release, you know, because it was like having somebody take a burden from me. But interestingly, you know, I was sort of at the time really desperate. So I sent the hard drive off to get fixed. There was a place in the Midwest that said, we can get the stuff off any hard drive. So I sent the dead computer off to the Midwest, and they called me up and said, you know, doesn't happen very often, but we cannot get 2 sentences off of your hard drive. And, you know, so it was definitive, which in a way is better. So what I decided to do was think about starting something completely different, something that was nothing like a short story, that was not for adults, that was just in a completely different kind of like mental and emotional place. And I began to think about when I started loving reading, and that was when I was a kid. And I started thinking about the books I loved. And one was, I loved Judy Blume, who we just talked about. I loved E.L. Konigsberg very, very much, you know, deeply. I loved Norma Klein, but I also loved Robert Heinlein, and I loved Ray Bradbury. And I loved in particular a book called Red Planet. And in a lot of ways, that first book, First Light, that I worked on for some years, luckily not 12, was inspired by the fantasies that I loved when I was a kid. So that book was kind of inspired by the kind of thing that I loved very deeply when I was a kid. But it was actually an incredibly ambitious first project because it involved world building, you know, and 2 points of view that alternated. And at the time I was not very experienced, so I didn't really appreciate how challenging that would be. So. Yeah,
something we've thought about doing from time to time is creating like these author bookshelves. Like imagine if there was a bookshelf that was only sort of the books that made you. So what are some of the other books that made you?
So the E.L. Konigsberg book that I really love is the one with the hardest title to remember, which is Jennifer Hecate, William McKinley, and me, Elizabeth. It's one of her, it won, I think, a Newbery Honor or something. It's not like any of her books were under the radar, but it's not one that I hear talked about a lot. That for me was sort of one of my core books as a kid. Another one is Mom, the Wolfman and Me by Norma Klein. Another one was All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. I just loved animals, and I just loved his he wrote about being a vet, a farm vet. And in First Light, I have a lot of animal plot. There's a lot of dog plot, including love and parenthood and, you know, all of it in my first book. And a lot of, again, that book really is in so many ways like an ode to what I loved about story, you know, when I was 11. So I think you should do that. It's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun. I think that the thing I've learned from having a bookstore is that a book really needs to be an object, especially for a kid, is that a book there is a special spark of magic that comes from it being a physical object. And like we know instinctively that it's better to give a kid a book for a holiday or their birthday than it is to give them a download, right? Is there one book that has a real special spark of magic for you just in its physical presence?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that has to be Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. I still have the book that I read when I was 10, or I don't know exactly how old, but I have the book I read, and I'm reading that book. You know, I can't re-experience now what it was like for me to read that book when I was young. But it was really intense and wonderful. And I actually went and met her. I think she's the only children's author that I met as a kid. I mean, it just wasn't that common, you know, when I was a kid to meet writers. And she was at a bookstore, and I went, and, you know, there she was behind the table, and I was absolutely speechless. I mean, I could not speak, but she wrote you know, she inscribed the book to Rebecca Tesserwell, and it's just, her writing in the book is beautiful. I mean, it actually makes me kind of shudder to think like how sometimes I scrawl my name in books, because it did mean a lot to me that it looked beautiful. You know,
Yeah.
I think she had like a calligraphy pen or something. And it was a hardcover book, you know, and not all my books were hardcover, so it felt very special. And I had my unicorn book plate in it also, which I glued these in to special books. And it would say
awesome.
From the library of, and then I wrote underneath Rebecca Stead, and I tried to write it really neatly. So I still have that book, and that to me is sort of probably my most like magical physical book.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
What about you?
Oh, for me, it would be, gosh, it would be, there was an author named Piers Anthony. He was Spell for Chameleon, the Xanth series. And there's something about
my stepbrother was so into those. And to me, they looked really like sophisticated and complex. I don't know why. I was intimidated by those. So
they were,
you were into that series?
Like a book that you read to your kids, and that you read as a kid, and you read them to your kids, and you start reading, you dive in, you're like, here we go, and then you start reading, and you're like, this isn't the same as I remember it. That happened. Which is, I think, something that's really interesting about your books, I think, is that they are really timeless. Like especially this latest book, is that there is a bit of a time and place, you know, but not many references. We know it's in New York, and we know there's Skype. That's it. And I wonder if you did that on purpose to make it. Did you strip it? Good. I guess.
Thank you so much for that question. I did. So I decided early on that this is a book about internal experience. And I felt like when I was young, my internal experiences were kind of wide and deep. And, you know, what I mean by that is I felt like the gamut. I mean, and in a totally typical kid way, I don't think I was unusual. I think this is the experience of childhood. You know, there's a terrific range of emotion, and the experience of the emotion is intense. And I wanted to write a book about that because it was such a big part of my life. You know, my feelings were just a huge part of my day every day when I was young, and not in a bad way, but in a way that was kind of like saturating, you know what I mean? And I had been aiming for a while at writing a book where that really is the front and center story of the book. So I did actually consciously not try to draw too much about the outside world, because it didn't feel kind of necessary to the story. And I try to cut out everything that's not necessary, just as a rule.
That's really funny. I have a book somewhere in this office. It's in fact, give me 2 seconds. I have to grab it. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. This book reminds me of your writing. Actually, it's this is I think this came out the 65th anniversary Peanuts.
We have that.
You can see the title's not on there, right?
Yeah.
And the title is actually Only What's Necessary. And I think about that when I read. Yeah, I think about that when I read your work, and I think that you work like a cartoonist in a way. It is that the story is really pared down to its essence, and I think that's really interesting. And I kind of wonder what makes you there. You must know, obviously, as a skilled writer, you know the parts that are necessary, but there are other parts that aren't exactly necessary, and I wonder what makes you decide to put those bits in.
Yeah, I mean, right, because the idea of what's necessary is kind of arbitrary or at least subjective. If not arbitrary, right, then like hugely subjective, and it's just me deciding. But often I put things in because to me they contribute something usually on an emotional level. Like, you know, like there's a moment in the story where Bea and her dad So her dad is waiting for her. BC's a therapist once a week, Miriam. And her dad is waiting for her outside of the therapist's office. And there's just this small moment, which is definitely not, plot related, where she misses her mom. And he dials her mom on his phone and hands it to her. And she has this very brief, not super significant exchange with her mom, but they hear each other's voices. And then he zips her up into her coat and pulls her hood up. And to me, that is something that I wouldn't like. It may not seem necessary in any way to the story, but to me, it feels like this essential moment in defining their relationship. And also she's so well taken care of by her parents, in my view. They really do everything they can to meet her needs. And, she's not in the easiest situation. She has a more complex life than some kids. And that to me was just like a moment where as soon as I wrote it, I thought like, I cut so much from my stories, but I thought this is a moment that I will forever love in this book. And it's almost for me a little bit like she's talked about a trip to the museum where they've looked at the armor and at the, the Met. And to me, it's almost like an echo of the description of her favorite armor, which is like German armor for man and horse, or I forget exactly what it's called, but I did go and research it. And it's sort of like an echo of that moment. Like he's helping her kind of armor up in that moment, because it's a hard moment for her, even though it's really small.
That's nice. And let's rewind a little bit for those that are watching that haven't read your book. Can you tell us a little bit about it? How did you get there? How did she get there?
Right. So, B is a kid who, for the most of the story, she's a fifth grader, and she's getting ready over the course of fifth grade for her dad's wedding. He's getting remarried. So she has gone through a bunch of changes. In third grade, her parents got divorced. Her dad came out. He has a boyfriend, Jesse, who B knows really well and loves. And at the beginning of fifth grade, she's well used to her life going back and forth between her parents' houses. And her dad tells her that Jesse and he are going to get married at the end of, around in May. And so this is like generally good news, but not earth shattering for B, because she already loves Jesse and she's already settled in her life. But the thing that is important to her is that Jesse has a daughter who is her age, and she lives in California. Her name is Sonia. And so she is going to come to New York for the first time, and then hopefully thereafter be part of their lives. I mean, not every day, because she's mostly living in California, but with her mom. But it's a huge thing for me, who has longed for a sibling, and in particular, a sister. So she is, as you said, she has these extra big feelings. So she goes, 120% into this fantasy where they're going to be, instant perfect sisters. And, she just zooms right there with every expectation about the relationship and the wedding itself, and just how, in a way, this piece of her life is going to look a little bit more how other people's lives look. And so it's sort of the story of what actually happens over that year in terms of what happens when Sonia comes and B's own expectations, and then ultimately her acceptance of, she's learning about her own feelings throughout the story, but she's also, and how to manage them and how to express them and how to identify them. I mean, these are things that I think we deal with throughout life, but she's also recognizing that, guess what, other people have feelings too. It's not just her. So, over the course of the story, she starts to see Sonia as more than just like a symbol of you know, the sister that she's always wanted, but as in fact the real person she is.
Yeah, in a book about feelings, one of the things that surprised me out of the gate was, you know, the book pretty much starts off with B learning the news from her parents who sit her down and say, we're getting a divorce. And it hit me like, and of course I didn't know the character very well at that point, but it hit me in the stomach in a very small way, the way that it might have hit a young person. But I was surprised that at that moment that you chose not to go into B's feelings. And I was very curious about that, why you decided not to do that. In fact, she seems to sort of accept it, and she learns the rules and marches onwards. And then when Miriam comes into play, I think I started to get it.
Yeah. So I feel like I wanted it to be a story about a kid whose parents are divorced and a kid whose family is changing. But for some reason, while I was writing, I just wasn't tempted to write about the experience of having your parents get divorced. Although as the main dish of the book, you know what I mean? So what I wanted to do was have that be, you know, it's sort of an inextricable part of how she sees herself. But the real story that's unfolding over the course of the year is this rebuilding of her dad's life and family in a way. And, but you do get, so in the beginning, it does seem like that part is quick, and then it's sort of fast forward 2 years, right, to where she's in this other place, and she's already had divorced parents for 2 years. And so she's experienced, but I think there is sort of throughout the story, she is able to kind of share moments about joy and sadness and longing and sometimes guilt, you know, that she feels. And it's just sort of part and parcel of her experience as a kid with divorced parents. And there's so much love in it, you know, I mean, there's a lot of love between her parents actually, and, you know, certainly between her and her mom and her and her dad. And that was sort of the anchor for me, was to have her be like beautifully taken care of. And in part, this book was inspired by a talk I heard at a conference by Vera B. Williams. So it's inspired in a way by a picture book, where she talked about the book More, Said the Baby. Yeah. And she talked about how that when she was making that book, I'm rephrasing, but she talked about how she wanted to make a book where the child was always at the center of her universe. And that it really is just a story about a child receiving love from the adults in her life, or his life, because it's a series of kids, if you know the book. And she talked about how she even put the child at the center of the image on the spreads. And I sat there listening to her and I thought, you know what, I want to write a book like that, but that's completely different, you know, and it's about a much more complicated situation than a kid just getting hugs, right? And that's for older readers. And so in a lot of ways, that was what I tried to do. I don't know if I'm answering your question anymore.
You are. It's interesting, you know, the list of things that will not change. Right away, she's given a list of things that will not change. Her mother loves her very much, and that will never change. Her father loves her very much, and that will never change. And it's reassuring right from the get-go. And I was curious, were you ever tempted to upend any of the things that will not change, or was it necessary to keep those as constant?
Yeah, it was necessary. I mean, I wanted those to be there. I really wanted that to be something she could hold on to. And instead of sort of having, I mean, I feel like when you're writing books, there's always a temptation to like jerk the character's comfort away, you know, like a lot of the time when you take writing workshops, they even say things like, you know, how can you, you know, make your character miserable? And that rarely is motivating for me. I don't know. I just don't get ideas. That's not where my ideas come from generally. So I never thought about like even getting close to shaking any of those things that will not change. I did originally have 2 lists. For a long time, there were 2 lists. There is her parents give her a list of things that will change, and they give her a list of things that will not change. Oh. And then, and so she had things on both lists. And I was like super satisfied with this for a long time. I thought it was great. And then as I got toward the end of revision, I realized the only list that matters is the one about the list of things that are not going to change. The other list doesn't matter because everything that's not on the list is sort of the list of things that could change, right? So, so I got rid of the other list.
Yeah, one of your trademarks is writing from different perspectives at different times. I saw an interview with you at, well, it wasn't an interview, it was a speech at Simmons when you were accepting an award. And you were talking about how when you wrote the speech, you were a person who was projecting the person who is going to give the speech. In this book, it's 12-year-old B writing about 10-year-old B's experience. And something that really struck me about this book in the times that we're in is that Rebecca Stead before COVID wrote this book, and Rebecca Stead after COVID is talking about this book. Yeah. And I wanted to know, of course, now that the book becomes more important in a way, because every kid wants to know the things that will not change. I was just wondering about your experiences with the times that we're in, and just a broad, open question. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. It's really been complicated. I think that in a lot of ways, even though I'm not like a big planner, I've never before had such an absence of plans, and I don't mean just like a calendar of events. I mean like just a sense of an intention about what I'm going to do next. So I've always, for the last like 15 years, always had a broad intention to sit down and write another book. And I always hope that that will be what happens next. But right now that feels harder. And I don't know why, and I'm just trying to stay optimistic. But I guess part of it is that we're constantly being drawn, to the news and to, like trying to stay in touch with so many people while being able to see none of them. My dad also actually was sick with COVID-19 and luckily has recovered, but that was something that definitely put a lot of, we're all taking care of each other, and I guess I feel like that feels like the most important thing right now, is sort of staying in touch, taking care of one another, showing one another like kindness and our love. And I am doing a fair amount of reading, which is good.
Good. Is there anything that you're reading during this time?
I just read a very comforting book by Mary Rose Wood called Alice's Farm. It's sort of it's not in any way like a reprisal of Charlotte's Web, but in a way it has a gentle spirit, and it's about a farm and a rabbit named Alice who decides that she's gonna take care of this farm. And so it's actually animals like planting a vegetable garden. I don't know. I found it very meditative and inspiring and moving. And there's a bald eagle in it named John Glenn, and he can talk to the baby in their family, and the baby keeps trying to tell the adults like what's going on and clue them in, and the adults just think that she wants to play patty cake, and it's terrific. So that was very soothing. What about you? Are you reading?
Well, I'm doing some things well, some things not so well. You just reminded me about your story, is that there's this game called Animal Crossing that's very popular, especially amongst women right now. it's a game where
I keep hearing about it.
It's a lot like the book you just described. Basically, you're given a task and you have to plant your garden and you sell your wares, and it's a very calm game. It's not a violent game, and it is meant, I think. But a lot of
I had no idea. That sounds great. I had no idea. I thought it was like Frogger. Remember Frogger? Like where you would try to cross the road and then you would, get smushed. And so whenever people said Animal Crossing, that's what I thought they were talking about. And I thought that is the last thing I'm getting into right now. But now I know. Thank you.
Something that I think is really interesting in your book is something that sort of I'm always in awe of it as a writer, is that some of the things that you bring up in the book are so specific that they feel like they have to be memories. And I'm wondering, how often are you drawing from only your experiences? Like, does your writing always have to be grounded in some sort of real life experience or equivalent, or can you easily come up with something like the leftover coats in the restaurant where the kid shakes their hands? How do you come up with stuff like that?
You know what? It's a total mishmash. A lot of things I do take from my own life, and I feel like I do need a connection, usually an emotional connection, but sometimes what it's like the debris, the details come with the emotion, like stuck on there kind of. And so sometimes I do use them. B at one point plays a game with a friend. A friend teaches her a game where they're eating a piece of cake and her friend takes a bite of the cake and then says, now you take a bite. And they pass it back and forth. This is a distinctly non-COVID era game.
Right.
They pass it back and forth until it's just like tiny, and it's kind of gross even to take a bite and pass it back and forth. But they keep doing it until it's just like a speck. And B finally says, that's gross. I'm not eating that. And her friend says, oh, this is a game. Like I only played this with my brother. And it makes B feel good because she loves feeling, like she belongs to people. And so that is from a friendship. And that is something that I did with one particular friend growing up.
Right.
But the coats abandoned in the coat room at the restaurant and how Angus names them and shakes their sleeves, that's made up. So I something, it's just a total mix. Do you find the same when you're working?
Well, I spent about 10 years just trying to write down everything I could remember from being a kid. And that's what I used for my books. And now I have to invent memories. Yeah.
And how does that, how do those things compare? Like, does one feel less true?
Yeah.
I mean, I know one is less true, but does it feel different?
It's funny because if I let's say there was something that was true and I put that into my books, I might actually later these days, I might invent something that's funnier, but it feels less worthy of being in the book because it's not grounded in some sort of truth.
That's interesting.
There's something that you wrote about that I could see myself in, where B dances in her room. She turns off the light and she dances with abandon because, but the problem is her mother doesn't let her lock the door. And it brought me back to, I guess, maybe like 1976 when I got in trouble and I was banned from watching the Donnie and Marie show, right?
Oh.
And
what did you do? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I was up in my room and I could hear the theme song music coming on downstairs, and I was dancing in my room, playing with a Nerf ball, like really going out and dancing. And then like my mom had come up to the top of the stairs to tell me I could come watch the show. And I was like dancing exuberantly. And then when she saw me, I dropped my face and acted really sad. It was really pathetic. That's a pathetic memory. Something else.
It's a great memory. I mean,
I think
these are the intense ups and downs of childhood, though.
Yeah. Well, it's something that I thought was really interesting, and we'll get to questions from the crowd in a moment. Was that you allow B to have some moments that she should be ashamed of, some pretty bad moments. And I was wondering, is that, was that hard to let you, because you're trying to let your readers fall in love with the character. And then some of the things that B did were not funny and hurtful and harmful. And I was just wondering how you felt about that as a writer.
I feel good about that as a writer because I mean, I know that there are going to be some people who say, I feel like when you're writing, you have to stay true, like, to the intention of your book as much as possible. So I tried not to hear the voices of the people who might say,
right,
we're supposed to like this character and like she, sometimes like she bops this girl on the nose and like things and other things happen. And, but I really, for me, one of like the central things about having feelings is, understanding that intense feelings, including hard feelings or, feelings of rage, and, great frustration or just, feelings that you cannot conquer in the moment, may lead you to make really, some poor choices, but that ultimately you still need to recognize those feelings and, in a sense, embrace them. I don't mean embrace them like try to exaggerate them, but I guess what I mean is forgive yourself and understand, that what you're doing is just being a human being and having human feelings. And, throughout the story, particularly with Miriam and in her own thoughts, she's sometimes like really trying hard to figure out what it is that she's feeling. And the more she does that, the happier she is, and the more generous she's able to be toward the people around her. And, ultimately she is able to forgive someone who isn't very nice to her. And she's also able to forgive herself. And I feel like that is the road to good behavior. And I feel like, and not just good behavior, but to like a moral core that you can then carry with you throughout your life. But I think that I don't know, I'm not a psychologist at all, but I feel like a big piece of childhood is accepting those parts of yourself that make you do things, that you're not proud of. And I don't mean that she should ever be proud of hurting anyone, of course, but the whole goal, and one of the reasons I like telling it from a slightly older B's point of view, is you have the strong sense, and she even says at one point, those days are behind me. But it's in part because she was able to accept those parts of herself, understand them better, and therefore not take it out on other people when she didn't know what she was feeling inside, because now she kind of knows. I don't know. Does that make any sense to you?
It reminded me of a moment. I think I'll admit this on video here, is that my most shameful moment as a kid was, I think I was about 12 years old, maybe 11. And my friend and I were on like a camp out with a whole Boy Scout troop. And we, the rest of the troop went down to the river for a hike. And our goal was to guard the tents, whatever that meant. Like, we just had to guard them. And while we were there, we were horsing around, and my friend sort of jokingly threw a knife towards me, and it went right through a tent, like in one side, out the other, just went right through it.
Oh my God.
And friend and I, like in one instant, we lost our minds and just like were throwing the knives through the tents, which were going through the tents like butter. And like, and then we like came out of this, like, this almost like this rage in a way. And, when the rest of the troop came back, they were like, what happened to the tents? And we were like, we have no idea. But just like 2 years ago, I was at I drove by, there was like a Boy Scout, they were selling popcorn or something like that at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that to raise money. And I pulled my car over and I gave him like $400 to pay for those tents.
To
so
buy
it took me a
new
long time to
tents.
get to redemption, but I got there eventually. Rebecca,
Well,
I think
we all have our moments.
I had that one, that's for sure. What we're going to do now is, first of all, I'm going to encourage everybody to buy this book. It's a great book. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
We are a bookstore. There's a click button at the bottom of the page, and guess what? If you click on it, you will not go out of this chat. So that's one of the beautiful things about this platform. Sorry, Rebecca, a little bit salesy on you. But now what we're going to do is, Kim, we are going to take questions for, I'd say, we have about 10 minutes, right, Rebecca? 10, 12, 15 minutes?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Let's go.
Rebecca has big plans. We can't keep her from her big plans.
We're all night.
Okay, so the top number one question is from Lori. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How do you come up with your titles?
Ooh. I'm always surprised which titles fly. So I have not come up with most of my titles. So First Light was not my title. When You Reach Me was definitely not my title. And Liar and Spy, I don't think was my title. So I often have weird titles that nobody likes. And so the ones that I was allowed to keep were Goodbye Stranger and The List of Things That Will Not Change. So arguably, both a little bit odd, but I don't know, maybe they got tired of turning me down. But I really wanted this one to stick because it was kind of like my North Star, while I was writing, and this book took me years to write. And so I would have been sad, but it's just one of those things that it's almost just like a leap that at some point in the process you seize upon something and you don't let it go. Do you find that too, Jeff? Where you sort of like, I feel like you pick things up and you put them down, but then sometimes there's one that you pick up and you don't want to put it down and you don't want anyone to take it away from you, but then they might. But this one I got to keep.
And I just wanted to ring before you go to the next question is that I had read When You Reach Me about 10 years ago, which would have been odd for me at the time because it was, a book for middle grade readers and we didn't have a bookstore. But I love the, I guess you could say supernatural aspect of it. So when I read this book, I started reading it and it was like, here's this character introduced, here's Jesse. And I'm like, oh, I'll bet Jesse's from the future. But no, there's no time travel.
No one is from the future.
But okay, Kim, give us our next. So now you gave us the best question. Now we're going to the next. It's just going to get worse and worse as we go until we fizzle into.
Okay, yeah, good.
Okay. So this one is from Miriam, age 13. What was your inspiration for the book, and how do you write from a 10-year-old's perspective?
So my inspiration is usually coming from many places. It takes me a long time to decide sort of what the territory of a book is going to be. And a lot of that decision is not like me sitting and having deep thoughts. A lot of the decision-making process is just me writing scenes and deciding like which scenes seem to have some life in them. And I try to sort of ignore everything that feels inert or just like nothing is happening there in terms of like emotion or connection between the characters. So that, and because that's my process, just to write and write and write, mostly without any kind of plan, it's really hard for me to then go back and say the idea came from one place. But a lot of it is inspired just by my childhood experience and the way I remember having, feelings. And so I will start with something as vague as that and just start writing scenes. And they're often based on things that happen to me. And then as I revise and as I write, it tends to get farther and farther away from my own life, which is a very good thing. So, wait, was it a two-part question?
Yes. Whoops.
Where did I get the idea?
Yeah. And then let's see, how do you write from a 10-year-old's perspective?
Oh, from a 10-year-old's perspective. You know, I can't really answer that question either. I'm a big disappointment. I think I don't ever set out to write about a kid who is a particular age. So what I'm doing when I'm writing is discovering a character. And often when I'm writing the character, what I'm discovering is who she or he is and what is happening in that person's life, and including how old they are, where they live, who they live with, how they live, all that stuff. And so I don't make decisions ahead of time. So B is, you know, talking about herself when she was 10. And so for most of the story, she's 10. But it wasn't a decision that I made ahead of time. And I think that one of the reasons why I write books really slowly is that I spend a long, long time developing character. And so it's like she's inherently 10. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with just remembering what it was like to be a kid. But like, there are no tricks to it. You know what I mean? There's no trick. And I think that's a good thing, because if there was like a formula or a way to do it, I don't think it would be as meaningful. And I think that when I'm writing about a 10-year-old, mostly what I'm not thinking about a 10-year-old, in part because I don't like to write in any way that feels condescending to my readers, because I remember what it was like to be a kid, and you know, how complex life was for me, and also how complex my own thoughts were. You know, I had really deep thoughts, and I know that my readers have deep thoughts. And so I guess if I had one rule about writing for 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 8-year-olds, it would be to never condescend. And luckily, that's not something that I struggle with.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So Karen had a question, and I think you already answered a lot of it. Sorry,
Okay.
Jeff, did I just totally interrupt you?
No, it was a joke, and it was a poor one. So we'll edit that out. Go to the archive version.
Okay, so the first part of the question was, you kind of answered it already, Rebecca, are any parts of the book based on real life events that you experienced? But I really like the last part, which is, did you hear corn growing too?
No. So I've never stood in a cornfield in my life, but I did read a book by a scientist, and it's called Lab Girl. It's a memoir by a woman who's a scientist, and I'm not remembering her name right now. Maybe someone will put it in the notes. But she talks about the sound of plants growing and the fact that you can hear the leaves rubbing against one another as they're growing towards the sun. And I loved that idea. And it was just one of those things that I sort of picked up and wanted to create meaning for. I think that when you're writing a book and when you're revising a book, a lot of the time what you're doing is trying to put a lot of meaning into the details so that it's a rich, deep reading experience, hopefully. And, but in so many ways, this is based on my life. I grew up with divorced parents. They separated when I was 3, and I went back and forth like B every other day. So Monday at my dad's, Tuesday at my mom's, Wednesday at my dad's, Thursday at my mom's. In my head still, Mondays and Wednesdays are like male boy days because I was with my dad on those days, and Tuesdays and Thursdays are like female days because I was with my mom. But Friday and Saturday and Sunday alternated. And so a lot of it was, you know, my own material from being a kid and living that way. And as an only child for many years, my dad got remarried later in life, like when I was in high school. And then so now I have a half brother who's a lot younger than I am, and I have 2 stepbrothers. But then my dad actually came out a whole bunch of years after that. So it's been many parts. And so all of that sort of went into the story. And then just the memory of the feelings again, which was sort of my main, when you're looking ahead and you can barely see anything and you're writing and there's like a tiny little light up there, like that was it. It was a little light going, feelings. So
Kim, I wanted to interject with a question is that, Rebecca, one of the things that we have in common is that we write for middle grade, but neither one of us seem interested or pulled into YA, or maybe it works for grown-ups. And I was wondering, what is that line for you? Why is it that this is such fertile territory, but you wouldn't take it a step right for 18-year-olds?
Yeah, I haven't written for YA or really had any thoughts. I mean, to some extent, I'm just at the mercy of my material. That's how I feel. And for me, this is such a rich territory. These years, like between 8 and 14 maybe, are for me just incredibly interesting and sort of endlessly interesting, I guess. I don't know another way to put it, but I mean, how do you feel? I've never tried to make a rule about what I would write, it just feels like this is I feel like as writers, we're always going back to something, and we definitely see themes in our own work if we write more than 1 or 2 books. And I feel like I'm beginning to really recognize what my themes are, but also there's something about this time of life. How do you see it?
Yeah, I feel like I like writing right up to the end of childhood. In fact, where I play is in that last moment before childhood ends, because after that the problems of older kids are maybe too serious for me, or less because of that. I guess I'm the themes are maybe too heavy for me, but I like the idea. I like this age, that B is 12 in your book, is that the kid is aware enough to really know what's going on, but they are also powerless over their own lives. They know that the big decisions are made by mom and dad. And in fact, mom and dad are major players. If there is a mom and a dad, they're major players in the kids, because that's how it usually works out, I read that you said something about this. You said that, you are not as attracted to the books in which the child abandons or shoves off from the adults and is on their own.
I like reading them, but
right,
but not writing them for whatever reason. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking in a lot of ways, this is the age, this is the time of life where you're kind of seeing the world. I mean, you see the world of your family when you're very young, and you're mostly thinking about yourself. I mean, it's hard to really, I feel like it's sort of endlessly fascinating, that moment where a kid sees herself in the context of the wider world. I mean, that is like a profound moment, and it happens before you're 14, right? And it never happens again. In that, a lot of other things happen, and those may be profound experiences, but this moment of seeing yourself as part of the world, I think, is sort of incredible. And there's so many aspects to it. And so there's a lot to explore. Yeah.
Kim, I think we have time for 2 more questions. How about if you give Rebecca your very best?
Okay. So
come on, Kim.
putting pressure on me.
I like
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so all right, that one I'm going to save for the end because it's about the end. Let's see. Oh, I love this question. Okay, so this is from Sue. When writing, are you a planner or a pantser?
I'm not a planner.
Wait, how do you spell pantser? Is that somebody who pulls down somebody else's pants?
No,
I think it's like going by the seat of your pants, like flying by the seat of your pants.
They
I
spell
know.
it pants, like
In
PANTS-ER.
that would be like somebody pulls down your pants, right?
Flying by the seat of your pants.
No, I mean,
plotter or a
sometimes I
pantster.
say plotter or plunger. In a way, I'm both. I mean, I'm definitely not a planner. So I'm a pantser in the sense, or a plunger in the sense that as I said, I just start writing. And I have maybe a vague sense of kind of like the territory, but it's really vague. I don't know who the characters are. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I just don't know. And I write many, many scenes, like a book length of scenes in a notebook with a pencil. And that is my beginning. That's sort of like my material. And then I try to get really analytical, and I do try to plot or is it plot or pants? Yeah. But I have to start with that stage where I'm just generating material. So in that sense, I'm a pantser, because I have to do that before I can do the, analytical stuff and like all the cute stuff that writers try to do to get you to keep reading and, feel things and about the characters and really connect, almost like live inside your character for a while. Like that's always what I'm trying to do. And that, I mean, I can get like pretty calculating about that. And I mean, not in a bad way, but I can get really into the details and kind of geek out on little moments. And this is an echo of this. And so it's very detailed work, but I can't plan a book before I've written a whole bunch of scenes.
Yeah, cool.
All
right,
right,
Kim, make this one good, because it's our last question.
Yeah. So this isn't the top question, but I just like it. It's from Liz. It is for both of you, for Rebecca and Jeff.
Good.
What are your favorite characters from your books and why?
Oh, that's a doozy. Okay, Jeff, you have to go first.
You're the star of the show, so I'm going to go first, so you end. My favorite character is Rowley Jefferson. He's a kid he's Greg's best friend, and what I really like about him is that he likes being a kid. I think you get a sense of Greg right off the bat of what kind of kid he is. He's like, one day when I'm rich and famous, and Greg's a kid who, if he can see a PG movie, he really wants to see the PG-13 movie. And if he can stay up till 10 o'clock, he really wants to stay up till 11 o'clock. He's just he wants that next step. And Rowley actually is a little bit, I guess he's a little bit young for his age, as you would say, but he is childhood in its purest form. And so he's a good foil for Greg, who really, truly wants to hold on to his childhood as well. But he's just kind of wrapped up in himself and wrapped up in this older world. So I really like Rowley, and that's why it's fun to write books by Rowley Jefferson. So, which you cannot buy by clicking at the link at the bottom of the page.
Why not?
Rebecca's, which is great. Which is the way it should
both be there.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a good answer and a good explanation. I think that, it's hard not to sort of feel most invested in your main character. But I'm going to set aside B as the obvious choice and go with a character who sort of emerged with his own sense of kind of the world. And that is B's best friend, Angus, who is, I'm glad you approve. He is a kid who is incredibly self-directed in a lot of ways. He seeks a lot of knowledge. He knows a lot about the world. He's really active about finding out about the world, more than most kids, who are 10 maybe. But But at the same time, he is not at all shy about the fact that he needs B. And so he when she's absent, he really is annoyed and kind of like, are you coming back tomorrow? And he never misses a day of school. He's just sort of a kid who has a lot of self-sufficiency, but isn't afraid of what he needs and isn't afraid to talk about it. So he was like kind of a surprise to me as I was writing. And I also love the fact that he had a big argument with his mom about that he should have the right to save his dessert every night after dinner and eat it whenever he wants. And she kept pushing back and because he wanted to wake up in the morning and eat his dessert first thing every day. And she didn't want him to do it, but then he relentlessly kind of, logics her into the position where it doesn't really matter when you eat it. If you get one dessert a day, you should be able to eat whenever you want. And so he sits up every morning and eats his brownie or whatever, which is waiting next to his bed. And, I just love that about him.
That's awesome. I love that character too. And I just wanted to acknowledge I'm getting a lot of Wimpy Kid love on the right-hand side of the screen.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody, Caitlin, and everybody else that said nice things about my books.
I also have to say that I have a 19-year-old in the other room who is very impressed that I am talking to you right now. He was like, wait, what?
Well, I'm impressed.
He said, do you know him? And I said, well, I'm gonna. Yeah, well, I do.
I'm impressed to be speaking with a writer who doesn't need pictures as a crutch. So,
oh God, I wish I knew how to do that.
Rebecca, thank you so much. I just wanted to encourage everybody to buy this book because it will help us out as an independent bookstore.
Yeah.
And Rebecca too. I mean, she needs more wall station. She needs something better. Yeah. Please help her out.
Although it's pretty cool.
It is.
But I do not have what Jeff has. But and everybody remember that it's Independent Bookstore Day, right, on Saturday. Is it not?
It is. So it's kind of Independent Bookstore Month now. I popped back in.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead and say goodbye.
Yay!
So good. This was so fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks
and
so
order.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
everybody.
you so much, Rebecca and Jeff.
This was so much fun.
This was.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thanks, guys. See you guys, everybody. Inside. Take care.
Hey.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.